before in the Brexit referendum itself. I'll tell you, if John Major, Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown tell me something, I'll automatically believe the opposite to be true. It's about time these people who all pretend to be great PR merchants realized that. I'm sorry, Dr. Ranjeet, I've taken up some of your time. Dr. Ranjeet Brar, NHS consultant, physician, and surgeon on the coronavirus, as usual. One day, Doctor, we'll be able to talk about something else, but today we'll have to talk about the coronavirus, and in particular, the vaccine. You've heard, I think, I hope, some of the points that have been made on the show already about it, but give us first your view on where we stand right now with the vaccine.
Thanks, George. Really enjoying your show. I think the first thing to say is that your last point wasn't at all stealing my thunder. I think it's a point which is leading to these crises of confidence that we're seeing now. So I think the crisis of leadership, the fact that you're told to do something by our current leadership as well as the past Labour leadership, and you want to do the opposite, is precisely the problem. The record levels of corruption that we've seen of our government, cloud everyone's understanding of this issue, whether they believe there's even a virus at all, whether we should take the medicine, whether we can trust anything that's happening. The record levels of privatization of our NHS make people increasingly distrustful of medicine, which is something we see in the private sector. And you see within private healthcare systems, there's huge levels of distrust because there's a clouding of, the interests, the health interests of the population, and the population are always overwhelmingly the working population on the one hand, and the business interests and the profit making of huge and very wealthy corporations on the other. And where those things get conflated, it's a free-for-all of opinion. Where we are on the vaccine currently, we will be having, as you've said before, 800,000 doses made available over the coming week. I have been contacted, for instance, and told that that vaccine will be available to me this coming week. It will be the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. That is the mRNA vaccine. That is the vaccine that has to be, as you said, stored at minus 70 or 80 degrees C. And it's precisely for that reason that, one, that there's a relatively small number of doses. Two, that the conditions of storage and transport mean it will be easiest to distribute around certain central facilities close to the NHS. That essentially, in the first instance, it will be offered to, it seems to me, NHS staff who are a high-risk group, relatively speaking, in that a large number of them are actually relatively old, have comorbidities themselves, and obviously are working on the front line. And we saw 600 or 700, I think over 600 deaths of health and care workers.
600. That includes care homes, yeah?
That's right, care workers, George, yeah. So that's where we are. I have been, I think, offered the vaccine. I'm likely to say yes and take the vaccine, just as I think I heard you indicate. I've been watching the show, that you would too. And I think that'll be most people's response. In the first instance, actually, there are relatively few doses. So beyond healthcare workers, I think likely that it's going to be rolled out in care homes, who I think are most vulnerable population, and then probably offered on a tier basis to the eldest and sickest within our society. But still, the vast majority won't receive it this year, I think. So this is not the end of COVID, even if we were to assume perfect efficacy and perfect safety of the vaccine, George, and perhaps we should talk a little about that too.
Yes, but before we do, why does it have to be stored at such an extraordinarily low temperature?
Well, this is not a common or garden vaccine. Most of the vaccines that we have, the initial vaccines, the polio vaccine, for example, were based upon an inactivated version of the actual virus itself, and that's a protein. Those proteins can be stored at cool temperatures in fridges, and we're used to having our childhood vaccinations, our children have vaccinations, going to see the clinic nurse, perhaps at your local general practitioners, and then being stored in fridges, being taken out and administered to you, me, our children, and that's how we think of vaccines. And the protein vaccines, the inactivated vaccines, that is the model that's been used overwhelmingly by the Chinese. They have 5 vaccines, as you said, made by 3 different companies. All of them are essentially the inactivated inactivated protein vaccines. They've been given to a million Chinese citizens in total with an incredibly good safety profile, and those are storable essentially at room temperature or just below, so those would be much easier to distribute. These ones are mRNA. Anyone who has worked with RNA or mRNA, I myself used to do a trial or participate in a trial where I was isolating mRNA from patients with aneurysms. Aneurysms is a condition that I deal with surgically, but we're doing medical investigations into the genetics of aneurysms. And if you extract RNA and DNA from cells, it's unstable. And so to preserve its structure and function, it does need to be stored at low temperatures. And -70, we used to have to put it in dry ice, so with carbon dioxide, the stuff that produces the smoke for effects on TV screens and cinema productions. But we use that to keep a temperature of -70 whilst transporting it within kind of rapid delivery mail system. This obviously will be far larger numbers, so lorries and large low temperature fridges will be needed, and there aren't enough of those to supply the vaccine to everyone in the country at the moment. I mean, these statements are being produced, which really are just the initial press release of the company themselves. They've been released and reproduced by agency after agency, by the government, and then the government circulate them to other people. And I've even had it from the Royal College of Surgeons, but essentially I can see it's the same document cut and paste that's delivered by the company themselves. So we are at the point where they're assuring us that they have a great level of knowledge and experience of distributing cold vaccines. But really, this would be a world first. And certainly to imagine that the entire world could take such a vaccine would be a far-fetched scenario, George.
Yes, quite. I mean, portability within our country is one problem, and it's a big one. Portability internationally to poor countries with less reliable electricity supply and so on would be impossible.
I think that's right. And I think it's very unlikely that this vaccine will get widespread currency in the world, partly for that reason, partly because it's a new technology, and partly because actually, you know, the results, as one of your callers was saying, really haven't been adequately published. We have to assume that they've been shared fully and scrutinized by the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, and that the safety data is good. But so far, all I've seen is that a press release stating that the safety data is good. So I hope it is, and you know, I'm sure it is for that small number of patients who participated in the trial, which is 44,000. Makes it a large trial, but a very small number compared to the numbers who are about to receive that vaccine. And I look upon you know, this next wave of injections of the NHS as being the largest phase of the trial so far, and we will have more information. I hope that there will be very rigorous screening of the patients my colleagues, really, myself and my colleagues and other people around the country who take the vaccine, and I hope that it will prove to be safe and efficacious as indicated. But it does concern me that the results haven't been published. There's not really been peer review, that the follow-up period is very short, that we're assured that, you know, this works for all people in all countries in all parts of the world. But we haven't seen really whether one arm is comparable to the other. I mean, there's a kind of very standard, again, I have designed and run randomized controlled trials, and it's a very rigorous process. And so, you know, you have to produce a power calculation. You have to show what size of effect you're expecting to see between the vaccinated arm and the non-vaccinated arm, design your trial accordingly, and publish that data normally in advance. And I've not been able to find that when I'm looking for it on the web. You have to share your results in a certain way, be very rigorous about the statistical methodology that you use. You have to normally peer review your process, show that it's very rigorous in its double blinding, and show that the two arms really are the same, that the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated arm, are they comparable? And if we really look at this trial, and even if you pool everyone, really you're looking at the unvaccinated arm having a far less than 1%, maybe half of 1% or slightly more of them contracted the virus. And that's, you know, that seems very low. If we're really talking about the United States and Britain, if we look at the current figures, in the United States, 15 million people have had the virus. It means that far more probably than 1% of the population have had the virus. Indeed, they're talking about close to 1% of the population having died. So, you know, 66,000 out of 66 million would be 0.1%. The figures don't seem quite to add up. Certainly, if you look at the hotspots, we think somewhere between 5 and 20% of some populations, high-risk populations, will have already had COVID. If that's the case, you would expect to see a far higher number of people within the non-vaccinated arm contracting the virus. It doesn't seem right that people who haven't had the vaccine are also protected within the trial from getting the virus. So there are many questions, I agree, which are left unanswered. And I think the best way to answer them is simply to publish the data, let them be scrutinized. And that's kind of unanswerable. That's something that we can all believe in, other than those who will never be convinced and will never be convinced by the technology of vaccination. And I'm clearly not in that camp. You aren't. Most people aren't. Vaccination in general is a good technology, but this is a new kind of vaccine. And they've not been transparent in the way they publish data. And as we talked about yesterday, they had a conference and said they would start using, celebrities to push the vaccine. Matt Hancock has said he'll have the vaccine live on TV. I've even heard that the Queen, though she won't have it live on TV, will let it be known that she's had the virus. So all of these kind of media tactics to promote a vaccine rather than simply sharing the data and letting us scrutinize the knowledge base, which would be normal, I think add to people's sense of disquiet. So I agree with you. Probably most people will take the vaccine if offered.
Talking of questions, Doctor, they're banking up here. Would you be so kind as to listen in to some of these calls?
Absolutely, love to.
Wayne in Cheshire. Go ahead, Wayne.
It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you, sir.
I think I'll be one of the first to be asked or ordered to take the vaccine, but this first one, the Pfizer one, I will not be taking it. I've done a lot of research on it on the government website and the Pfizer website and ulterior media. I've come to the conclusion that, it actually says that the one that we're about to have changes your cells on a genetic level. Now, the other vaccines, such as the Russian Sputnik, etc., they are made the old-fashioned way, the same as when you get a flu jab. Now, I'm willing to take that, but I am not willing to have my genetic level on my cells to be changed in such a way that we don't know what are the side effects for the future. Plus, another concern of mine is that this one is $38 a vaccine. The Sputnik one is $8. Why aren't we using that to save money?
This is a question Dr. Brar and I have spoken about many times. Not only is the Russian and the Chinese vaccine more efficacious, more widely trialed, but it is virtually at cost. It's $8 as opposed to, what did you say, Wayne, more than 30?
38, 37.
30, nearly $40. Dr. Brar, what do you say to Wayne's points?
I think I agree with the substance of what he's saying. I mean, there's a scientific point on which I do disagree, Wayne, and we've talked about that a little bit before as well. So these messenger RNA is a substance which, so your normal way your cells work is they have a nucleus that's full of DNA. That DNA carries a code which can be transcribed or translated into messenger RNA that goes outside the nucleus into the protein manufacturing a mechanism, the Golgi body, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, these parts of the cell which make proteins. And that is then used in these ribosomes, which then translate that into a protein. So really, there's not a huge difference between giving the mRNA and giving the protein. It's just there's a stage whereby your cellular apparatus, just as it is affected by a virus and produces certain proteins, so this vaccine will encourage it to create a protein, and that protein happens to be the spike protein that is displayed by the certain part of the immune system to your white blood cells, and so your acquired immunity then is able to make antibodies. So it's just a way of training your own body to make antibodies to a part of the COVID virus. I don't think it's true to say, I've seen these kind of, and that is just a false claim, and it's sad. That's a misleading claim to say that this is going to affect the genetic structure of the people who take it. That's not true. I mean, living in the world affects genetic structure. Sunlight affects genetic structure. So your genes don't exist in some kind of a pristine isolation from the material world around it. But this isn't dangerous in terms of reprogramming or introducing some new aspect on a reproducible basis to your genetic code that will affect you or your future. That is not true. But on your other points, that it's expensive.
What about the Sputnik point? $8 as against 38.
Well, I think those are very true. I think, if you see, and there's a level of propaganda here. If you see that I guess capitalism to an extent is incapable of existence without corruption. And we've seen the NHS being corrupted by this revolving door. The chief managers of the NHS are people from private industry. In fact, the person who runs the NHS, Sir Simon Stevens, really is a scion of the private health insurance. So the ethos is corrupted by the higher levels of so-called public service in the NHS, in government, serving the private sector. And we've seen that. There's a classic example in Tony Blair, someone who served the oil sector, served the armaments manufacturer, has retired from government, has been given huge amounts of lucrative jobs and advisory contracts, and now is a multimillionaire himself with 400 million. On a small scale, you're seeing a similar thing where it does seem that our government are very protective of the interests of certain massive Western multinational companies. It doesn't make sense financially for our government not to take the cheapest and most efficacious vaccines, which happen to come from, Chinese companies and Russia. But they absolutely won't do that. They've poured scorn on their results. They've poured scorn on whether we can trust their science. There's a degree of chauvinism involved in that. There's a degree of great world power involved in that. But there's just a straightforward degree of corruption. There's a close link between our government and these companies. So there's unquestionably the case that this is a relatively new technology. It has the least well-published results so far. And so how it has been rushed through without really a level of public scrutiny, whereas we have had cold water poured all over the efforts of the Chinese and the Russian. Actually, more and more, they're just left out of the media. You could imagine at the moment that they didn't exist.
Don't exist, yeah, you're absolutely correct. Let's take Tom in Liverpool. Tom.
Hiya, yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Welcome.
I'm also just concerned, not so much, I'm not an anti-vaxxer and never would be kind of down that path or train of thought, but I've been reading the actual published government document of the side effects and the possible adverse reactions to the vaccine. I've actually got it up now while I'm speaking, just so I don't misquote it in any way. And other than obviously some of the side effects being the pain and the general side effects of vaccines and stuff like that, it has some concerning sentences in the report, such as effects on fertility. It is unknown whether the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine BNT12162b2 has an impact on fertility. So it just outright states that it is unknown what kind of effect it's going to have down the line on fertility in general. That's all it says about that.
I didn't know that. Good question, Tom. Let's hear Dr. Brar on that.
I mean, thanks for that question. So, I mean, the general side effects that have been published for all the vaccines, regardless of the technology that I have seen and been familiar with, are the ones we'd expect in terms of pain, swelling, a little bit of fever, headache, malaise, in other words, feeling a little bit unwell, sometimes mostly mildly, sometimes for a bit longer. So I must say, the Oxford AstraZeneca trial was briefly stopped when there was a case of transverse myelitis, which is a kind of a inflammation of the spinal cord, but ultimately that was found to be, we are informed, not related to the vaccine, so the trial was restarted. I haven't seen deaths. I haven't seen very serious consequences. The most serious one likely to be the case is some kind of allergy. Even if a small percentage of people develop some kind of allergy to one of the vaccines, then that could have serious implications in terms of its safety profile. But that hasn't been reported in any of the data I've seen. So to say it's unknown. They've been saying it's unknown, the effect on pregnant women, because pregnant women weren't included in the trial, is my surmise from that. Though, again, the exact structure and nature of the trials really haven't been published in detail, so it's hard to say. So they're not recommending that pregnant women take take the vaccine. But fertility, I've not seen any implication that it would. I'm not sure the mechanism by which it would affect fertility. So I think this is simply in the realm of unknown at this stage. And while that's disquieting, there's an extent to which every new medicine, when it first is introduced, we don't know its effect on a huge number of people. And all medicines which are introduced have an ongoing system of reporting, whereby if a number of cases of a suspected adverse event linked to that medicine come to light, this should be flagged up to the regulator. Use of that medicine should be temporarily suspended, or that an investigation should be conducted to see whether there truly is causality. So this level of scrutiny, I would absolutely expect, should attach to this vaccine as it's being rolled out, as it would be to any other medication. But I don't know. I haven't heard of any specific problems with the reproductive system.
Thanks for that, Tom. There's a call from China, Hong Kong in China, from Christopher. Go ahead, Christopher.
Yeah, how are you this evening, George? Pleasure to be on the show, and pleasure
Lovely
to be on the show
hear a
with
Welsh
Ranjeet, actually.
accent coming from China. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do like my accent as well. Ranjeet's been quite correct in most of the observations he's made with regards to the UK and NHS rollout of the Pfizer vaccines. No complaints there, actually 100% on the ball. With regards what's happening here in Asia Pac, actually there's quite a lot happening, I must say. Presently, we've got China has 5 registered vaccines with WHO, World Health Organization, and we've got another one coming online now. So that's 6 candidate vaccines from China. Very good news. The bad news is Asia Pac's also seen a large uptick in COVID-19 infections over the past 3 weeks. Indonesia's being hit severely, Philippines being hit severely, Hong Kong, where I am, is being hit significantly. We're back on shutdown again. Japan, Tokyo, 500 cases a day. South Korea, 1,000 cases a day. It's not looking good.
These numbers are minuscule, of course, compared to ours.
Oh, compared to Europe, these are small numbers. But given the effort that's been undertaken to contain the pathogen, it gives an indication of how aggressive the pathogen is in the transmission rate. So here in Hong Kong, we've had a very large outbreak centered around, believe it or not, come dancing places, 21 in fact, around 1,500 people involved in that being tested and traced. Of those people, more than 600 are infected. This is all in the past 3 weeks. We've had more than 1,000 infections in the past 4 weeks. We have 31 people in a critical condition in hospital and 305 people in a serious condition in hospital. And this is in a bloody country that's kept a firm, solid lid on what's been happening. So
very powerful call, Christopher. I'm very grateful for it. Dr. Brar, last one. Tell us how you respond to that.
Well, I think it's right. It shows it's a global problem. With this week, actually, in terms of the virus overall, in terms of tested cases, has been the worst on record. So there's been an uptick of 5 million cases this week, and we've seen days where almost 700,000 people around the world have contracted the virus, but test proven, and 13,000 deaths. So it shows you that China is taking this very seriously, precisely because they've been so effective, in shielding their population through amazing use of public health measures. They limited the virus in the first instance to less than half of 1% of their population. But that means that much more than 99% of the population are vulnerable to it. So vaccination has a big role to play there. They, as you quite rightly say, have 4. And you say 5 now, so that's great. Vaccines, I think all the ones that I've seen have been the relatively old-fashioned technology, but tried, tested, proven of an inactivated virus. They've given it to more than a million people, and it has a fantastic safety profile and efficacy so far. So they are getting ready, as they are in Moscow and other places, to start mass vaccination campaigns, and it will have a tremendous role in allowing them to move into normalcy, because when it's so prevalent around the world, you know, when the United States has got up to 15 million and almost 300,000 deaths, 288,000, 289,000 deaths, there's the constant risk of reintroduction from the rest of the world via China's and other countries' very extensive transport links. So vaccination unquestionably will have a role to play in limiting the impact of coronavirus, and in a sense, a bigger role for those who've been more successful at curtailing its spread through public health measures. George.
Dr. Brar, thanks as always. Very, very grateful to you. And thank you, Christopher in China, for that call. Give me a 60-second break. Count them.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones, with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me.
Everyone is welcome.
Calls through to 10 o'clock. Mick in Liverpool. Go ahead, Mick.
Hi, Mick. George, how are you doing?
All good. Nice to hear from you, sir.
All over the place there. Thank you for having me about that. I just wanted to call in about the poll that you've made, sorry, about which is more acceptable, the party.
Oh, yes,
or
yes.
whether it's taking the make, or whether there shouldn't be any political discourse in football. Obviously, I'm very excited about fans being let back. I'm an Evertonian, so that puts a little bit of perspective about maybe how I feel about the Millwall fans. But my answer to it would be, it's up to the players. It's their decision if they want to take the knee, if they want to wear the poppy. That is fully their decision. But what
Mick, take your hand away from the phone.
Hello, can you hear me any better now?
Not much better, but go on. We can hear you well enough.
Right, okay. I'll try and keep the phone still. So I think it's the players' decision whether they wear a poppy or whether they take a knee.
Yeah, I think that's right. The question is whether the players are now still freely taking that decision, or whether they just don't want to be the one that says, actually, you know, I think it's gone on long enough.
Well, to me, taking the knee is protesting against racism. So if the players want to do that and want to take that stand, that's what I'm saying, their choice. But that's what it's about, George. And at the end, I can agree with comrades and there's different things that we get.
Okay. There are other ways, of course. I'd rather give a clenched fist salute than take the knee. Personally, I kneel only before God, but it's an issue that's going to run and run. Mick, thanks for the call. Ronwell is in Chicago about Joe Biden. Go ahead, Ronwell.
Hello.